Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of AdSkits podcast series, Impressions and Chai. The topic for today is strategic influencer marketing, and which basically will dive into more about executing a well-rounded influencer marketing strategy. And for that, our guest today is Alaciel Torres. Alaciel is a senior manager of digital and social media at Golan, where she oversees their social media and influencer marketing. Alaciel brings years of experience in the constantly evolving world of social media, influencer marketing, and the creator economy, with experiences across multiple industries, including but not limited to healthcare, consumer products, and food. She has been successful in putting together a very effective social media strategy that brands can adapt, which I'm personally excited to learn more about today. So, Alasil, welcome to Impressions and Chai. Thanks for being us today. Where does this podcast find you?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Perfect, perfect. I guess so. My first question today is the one that I've asked a lot of influencer marketers, and I'd like your opinion on it as well. So, what are your thoughts on the role of influencer marketing in today's marketing strategy, and why do you think it's starting to become more of a mainstream marketing strategy?
Yeah, that's a good question because I've now been um, in, I guess, postgraduate career for 7 years now. And if you include like the years when I was still in college doing like internship work in social media, like influencer marketing was starting to get a little more traction. But now, nearly kind of 10 years later, now, in this role that I am right now, it's just a full kind of team of its own. It's really integral to any business, startup, small business in respect for like the needs that you have for your relative company or brand, but it really ultimately just boils down to like how you stay relevant in the game of business. It's and how you're quickly able to adapt to the game. So those who were able to maybe start working with influencers early on are obviously what 5 6 years into it much more equipped and know how to navigate that landscape, versus if you're someone who's just starting out or slower to adopt it, then that's just one part of a lever that you just need to build more on in that skill set, and kind of being relevant in that game, just staying in the game of having a successful business. At the same time, not saying influencer marketing is for every business, but at this point, I think it's just hard to ignore the level of impact it can make on a business. And it really just depends how you want to approach it. So for example, if you hear the origin stories of Butcher Box, this subscription-based service that sells, meat, they started off solely off of influencer marketing, just based on their the lack of budget they had, but they reached out to these smaller influencers on blog posts talking about either the keto diet or just the target that they had, and they were able to really drive success from the beginning due to influencer marketing, leveraging affiliate links, and having those early adopters to have high membership subscriptions from the beginning. And then on the other end, you have, an early or kind of what I call like influencer program fail or sponsored content fail. If you heard of the story of Dyson, I feel like this was a handful of years ago now, but they kind of created like a splash in a bad way when they were working with a bunch of influencers. I believe it was on YouTube to do a bunch of sponsored content. And the day that some creators posted their videos, everyone was posting about Dyson, from like your tech YouTubers to like your everyday lifestyle people, and there was just such a like kind of variety of content, almost in a bad way for the business, and people didn't know that how many people they were working with when they all the videos went up, and it was just clear that some people were in it for the spend or just for the money, and others actually took time to like think it through. So I think on that side of the spectrum, you don't want to be on that side. So you want to kind of find a balance in the middle. And in respect to PR is just integral, I think, as well, to see it through the success for a media campaign. It just gives it more legs when you're thinking about getting coverage from media for, let's say, your brand, raising awareness for a product launch or of that sort. So many ways you can tackle influencer marketing, and just a matter of finding out what is maybe the best way for you and just starting to test things out.
Okay, so that's pretty interesting, right? Like, so I guess you gave two examples, one two different types of brands, with two different outcomes. So it's not just, I guess it's not just picking up an influencer marketing strategy, thinking through it, planning for it, also plays a very important role in sort of making that influencer marketing strategy effective for your brand. If I have to gather some of the key insights from what you just said, so to speak. So perfect.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Now you've been doing this successfully for some time now. Would you mind sharing what your overall process looks like in terms of putting together an influencer marketing campaign? Where do you start? How do you find influencers? How do you evaluate them, and then go on from there?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So it really all starts with a brief. And by a brief, I mean a creative brief, or a brief where really the client then sees something that outlines all the things that you need to kind of build a influencer campaign, or just understand certain things like what is the target market they're looking for. Is this, potential campaign specific to certain cities? Is it nationwide? Who's your target audience? Are we looking at, lifestyle mommy bloggers? Are we looking at, just lifestyle general influencers? Are we looking for people that are really hitting that Gen Z audience? And from there, what are the goals? Is your goal raising awareness? Is it, driving conversions? Is it, promoting an event? Um, and after that, like, what are the different ways that we can, just help bolster up what else is in the works from like a media standpoint, whether it's like, well, you already have this other partner who is being part of, media interviews, or are they going to be used for different, like for a media blast day, and how can influencers help kind of build on that sustaining momentum. um, so once you kind of have that brief and answering those questions, you're able to then create like an influencer list based on the criteria that you set. So maybe based on the brief, you decided, okay, looks like if we want to target this market, these type of influencers, Instagram is our primary platform of choice. Then you can have a secondary platform if it makes sense with the budget or how you want to cross promote content. You look at different filters like maybe their age, making sure that maybe they hit on different types of content themes you want to discuss. So if you're promoting, let's say, back to school some back to school campaign, then obviously you want to work with people who have talked about back to school in their content, because otherwise it doesn't look as authentic to you as a brand or to that creator. You want to look at maybe their engagement rate. Depending on the platform, you're looking at different numbers, but just having those filters in place really can help streamline the process. Because in my line of work, when we have to build an influencer list, ideally you want to be spending as much time on it as possible. Because I've had days where I've literally spent a whole week, a whole work day dedicated to finding influencers, and you're scraping the internet, you're scraping Google searches, social feeds, and it really is a time intensive process. Granted, there are platforms out there that help find influencers and help you narrow down certain things, like by what's in their bio, or what's in their content. So I guess going back to maybe ButcherBox, if I was looking for influences for them, I would be searching for keywords like keto those platforms, which again helps streamline it. But you still have to go through each individual channel and or creator and scrape them and make sure they are brand safe and all these other things. So while the tools are out there to help us, it's still pretty time intensive and manually scraping certain things and data points. I think even sensing for brand safety is something that has room to grow and evolve too. And I think there are some tools out there now leveraging AI to help kind of us narrow down even sentiment for brand safety, which is just another layer that sometimes you would think is hard to quickly pick up on, and it only comes from a human looking at the account. But I know that's something that if it got to that place, it would certainly help streamline and quick, fast track like the influencer identification process.
No, that's I think you gave a pretty comprehensive sort of outline there. What sort of I caught on to, and I think I'd love your sort of an opinion on this. Like you mentioned brand safety, you talked about engagement rate, you talked about content. In addition to the ones that you mentioned, these 3 points, which I would look at, in the process of vetting influencers, three of the data points that you mentioned. do you consider any additional data point just for our audiences, or do you have a in addition to the three that you mentioned, which is engagement, brand safety, do you look at any other parameters or data points? If you had to look at influences from sort of a analytical perspective, you already talked about looking at them from a qualitative perspective in terms of, okay, are they seem to be authentic, is the content matching, but do you see this process becoming more analytical? What data points do you look for in addition to the ones you mentioned? It's just curious. So
Yeah, no, I can expand on that. I think, I guess, from a baseline to take a step back, follower count is
okay.
always like the first filter, which, depending on how you look at it, it is a vanity metric in many respects because what 10,000 followers mean on Instagram is very different than what 10,000 followers means on TikTok. Like to me, 10K on Instagram, I would count that as a creator who has really put in a lot of work to get to that follower count because on Instagram is pretty hard versus on TikTok, 10,000 followers is very kind of small and not like
That's
you
interesting.
can
Yeah.
just based on how the algorithm works, I feel like you're more likely to get more to that follower growth faster than you would on Instagram. With that being said, just based on how budgets and rates go, sometimes it is just easier to filter by that data point at first because when you start hitting into certain thresholds of like, those macro influencers, so like there's macro, mid tier, and then nano and like micro influencers. And
Mhm.
again, depending on the ad spend that you have available, the budget, a macro influencer for one campaign can be different for another. So, for example, 1 million can be almost too big for someone, and maybe a macro level is more like in the 300 to 500K follower tier
Okay.
if I stuck to Instagram. So, it starts with the budget that you have to play with in order to identify what does macro mean to you, etc. But follower count is really important just for the perspective of like mostly that budget spend. But in addition to that, the follower count also helps to establish like right those impressions, like the types of engagement you're getting from your followers. So when you have smaller follower count, it does sometimes equate to higher engagement rates. So if you can maintain a high engagement rate as you grow in your follower count, that's a really good sign for me as like a from the role of considering you for a campaign. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
Um, and then would you classify engagement rate as something like likes to follower ratio or comment to follower ratio or likes and comments to follow ratio? Just out of
Yeah.
curiosity. So
Yeah, again, I think it depends on the channel, but for the most part, right, like an engagement rate would consider all the different ways you can interact on a channel. So if that is like, and it's a TikTok, it would be a like, a comment, a share.
okay.
And then sometimes, again, depending on the campaign too, like sometimes I've only looked at the sponsored content and calculate an engagement rate based on that versus the organic content because, and through experience, paid content does not tend to get as high of an engagement as like creators' organic content, and that's just the way of how sponsored content goes. Is that when you put something that is in paid partnership with or hashtag ad, you tend to get a drop off from your followers. The algorithm just won't give you that much love sometimes. So if you are able again to maintain that high engagement rate or relative to what you normally see from organic content, that's also a good sign for me as someone who's evaluating you as a creator.
Okay.
With understanding that with paid spend you're able to kind of boost those views anyway. But yeah, sometimes you will want to understand engagement for a creator from a paid sponsor content and then the organic content.
That's pretty interesting. I think that was very useful. Um, Now, when we spoke a few weeks ago, we talked about how influencer marketing can play a role in a major milestone for a brand, something like a product launch. And then I guess you have your everyday collaboration. Can you talk a little bit about how brands can incorporate influencers for such an important event, and how can they make it effective?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question because when it comes to product launches, again, through the lens of public relations and in my, industry of PR, it is about getting coverage in as many kind of aspects as you can, whether from an earned perspective or paid perspective or, just also just digital. Again, it's all about using the levers that you have to your disposal. So from an influencer perspective, one good example that comes to mind to me is like a product launch that we did where the budget was there, that we were able to kind of split up the spend across different tiers of followers and really provide different touch points for our target audience depending on where they were at like in their journey and trying out that product. And in cluttered markets like maybe in fitness or in different spaces for products, that's how you can really make a splash with your influencer. So for example, maybe you have the spend for one big hero macro influencer who just has that relevance. The second they post something, their audience is super engaged. They're like, we love this. Oh my gosh, can't wait to try it. You just immediately have that instant gratification of like, oh yeah, we hit the awareness, we're hitting engagements, we're hitting consideration. That's awesome. Then you have your spend to maybe divide that up into more mid-tier followers. So maybe now instead of like your 600 plus, which was macro for us in this case, now you are looking at maybe in the 100K to 3 to 400K range. So from there, we're able to partner with two to four, I believe, influencers across a span of a few months to post about the content in different moments in time, connected to different themes. So for this product launch, it was great to just to have one post that was just, this is the main thing. This is one thing that I'm doing and partnering with someone. Stay tuned for more. Next month they post about this same product, but in relation to their everyday routine. How am I able to incorporate this new product in a way that is authentic to me and my brand? And just providing those different pulse points for their followers to stay engaged and throughout. So maybe if they didn't really get them off the hook from the first post, maybe there's another opportunity for the second month, and maybe the third month that they do a post for you. And then lastly, the remainder budget was spread across a larger group of influencers through a nano micro influencer network. And influencer networks are really good when you have maybe smaller budgets to work with. So if you don't have the spend to work on, just to pay one person or three or four, you can have maybe $5,000 spread to a group of 10 to 15 influencers, and it's like a mass media play where they're able to post their stories, their a quick little reel here, and it just provides a cast a wider net when you have those micro nano influencers. And that was really valuable because when you have those smaller networks, they're loyal, they're actively communicating with each other, they trust each other's opinions. And so that was just really valuable for this product launch. That I think, granted, we had the budget to use it, but in the respects on how we're able to successfully, reach different audiences based on the follower counts, I think it's just a really good case study on what that budget can do for you, based on what type of follower count you kind of target.
You basically laid out a playbook for our audiences. I mean, like I guess next time anybody wants to use an influencer marketing strategy for a product launch, all they have to go is like rewind episode between
Yeah.
this time zone, and then if they blindly follow these instructions, I'm guessing they'll have a successful product launch. No, but I think that totally makes sense. I think the way you outlined it, um, uh, by working across influencers, across different tiers of followership, if you will, you
Hmm.
can have different levels of impact. Now, my question here is, and I'm trying to relate sort of your paid advertising strategy to influencer marketing. Do you have an ideal? In paid advertising, you have this term called as frequencies, like the amount of time a person will be exposed to an ad. um, do you have any similar thoughts when you're doing a big campaign or a big event like a product launch, where uh, the amount of time or the frequency with which an influencer talks about your brand, have you seen like an optimal count, if you will, where okay, it's good enough that there's retention and engagement, but it's not too much where okay, this is starting to get boring.
Right, right. And then they end up not unfollowing you as a
Yeah, yeah,
creator, and that's the last thing you want to do,
yeah.
right? Yeah, and that's a good question. So I think depending on um, where you land with a creator, yeah, because that's something they're top of mind too. Is like you don't want to be just talking about them every other week. It depends. Like there's some creators who now, as we know at this point, the creator economy, who have started their own brand, their own selling point. So if someone's a diehard, like Mr. Beast, he can post about Feastables, his brand, his shirts as much as he wants, and he probably won't lose that much goodwill because of the value that he continues to bring to his audience and all the great content. So I think it's the balance between the goodwill that you build by providing really great value to your audience as a creator, and then maybe the goodwill you might lose by promoting something else and pushing it. Whether that's something that you are pushing yourself as like, this is my new product, my new merch drop, or this is this new product that I'm, helping sponsor. So I guess the question there is like, when you are able to post at least one in feed post, I guess if we stick to Instagram as the
Hmm.
example, you do a reel more often than not. On my side of things, we will try to secure a story post with that.
Okay.
So a lot more often than not, so creators will have like a bundled rate where you say, okay, yeah, I can do a carousel post or a reel packaged up with 1 to 2 or 3 story frames.
Okay.
And usually you're able to either leverage other type of content. Sometimes they'll just repost the reel to their stories with a couple other photos, or sometimes I like to at least say, no, I would really like new content that you're making for the stories, whether that's like a selfie angle, like POV, I'm trying this new product,
Hmm.
and then the in feed is something else. So in terms of like the first post you're doing with someone, it's nice to have more than one touch point.
Okay.
Um, when you are doing more sustaining content, yeah, I think at least I haven't seen anything that I've done on my side of work doing more than one post in a month.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
think one post a month is pretty optimal, depending on your relationship with that creator and knowing that, okay, yeah, like we can get away with one post, and then we'll work with you on the next post for the following month, or maybe a month break in between. It also depends on the contracts too, because we've had negotiations where creators will want to say, oh, well, I can post you this week, but then next week I have another slot for another competitor or in line with someone else. And that's something you want to be cautious of too, is like how many sponsored posts they're currently going to be posting within a week or a span of a month. Because we've had one instance where our post went up, and then the next day they posted another brand after us, and that's not really ideal either. So that's something also when you're thinking about the posting cadence with someone, if you're working with them on more than one post, is making sure what else is on their calendar so it doesn't conflict and overlap too much.
I think that was. I mean, I'm just looking at it. That was so informative. I think both from. I think you covered both angles, both from a influencer creator perspective as to like how can they collaborate with the brand at the same time, one delivering value to their audiences, because that's most important. If they're
Hmm.
not delivering value to their audiences, their followerships is going to go down. At the same time, for the other side of the equation, for influencer marketers, making sure that you are actually working with a creator who is delivering value to their audiences, because in the end, that is why they have a certain amount of engagement. And because if you collaborate with them in an optimal manner, you're going to basically get into a win-win situation where
Hmm.
the brand benefits because of the engagement from the influencer, and at the same time, the influencer is continuing to deliver value to their audiences. So I think you summed it up pretty well. Uh,
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's just all about maintaining that brand trust on both sides.
Yeah. And I guess that's where the whole influencer marketing started, right? Like, because there was authenticity, there was trust between a creator and an influencer, is why influencer marketing became popular, if you will, within brands as
Hmm.
opposed to mainstream advertising. So,
Totally.
um, yeah. So another important aspect that I learned during our previous conversation was different types of engagement models that you can have when you're adopting influencer marketing. And what I found intriguing was the on always on or the long term collaboration model that you talked about. So if you could shed some light on that for for our audiences, as to
Hmm.
when should brands consider that, and how can they go about executing it.
Yeah, no, this is interesting because it kind of goes back to the case study I brought up earlier on for this product launch. So I think it's a really good idea to pitch to a client, a prospective client, when they're, maybe getting their feet wet in the influencer marketing space, or maybe they've done it before and it didn't work for them. And so why would I do it now? And it really comes back to like, right, that value that they got. And it's kind of hard to feel like you get that from like a one-off post, right? Sometimes. So for something a little more sustaining, that's where like an always-on partnership can be really valuable because you're able to see that ROI over time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in addition to having those additional dollars, let's say whitelisting or promoting it to like via like dark ads, whether it be like a Facebook ad or through Meta
Mm-hmm.
ads or through TikTok Spark ads. So I think that's just a valuable tactic to utilize when you are able to kind of show that value to someone. And it goes back to also building that trust, right? And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of brands now and companies want to present their influencers as extensions of their brand as brand ambassadors, so
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to, I guess going back to how we would pitch this, it's through the strategy and that creative hook. And sometimes, in our line of agency work, you want to use these buzzwords, right? Like our blank network, or these are our blank ambassadors, and that type of way to frame it to the client as like, these aren't just your one-offs. These aren't just, the hashtag ads. These are the people who are living and breathing your product and why they love it. And, they're not just spitting, words just to say it, they are there because they believe in what you sell or believe in the mission and the value that you have as a brand. So by being able to work with these always on partners, you're able to build that over time. And it also makes it easier, at least on our side, when you are able to dedicate this time to building a list, you sell it, you have your top choices. These are your alternates. And once you secure them, you're working with them for 90 days, even up to 6 months. And that to me is just a very most efficient way of working with influencers, because the last thing you want is just a one-off campaign to be done at the end of the month, and then you're on to the next one and you're kind of repeating the process again. So it also is just easier on both sides, really. You deal with contracts, negotiations, payment processing, all within like the month and a half leading up to your campaign, and then you're kind of set for 3 months until they say, hey, that payment didn't go through. You're like, okay, let me go back and check. But just the fact that from an operational standpoint, you're able to cover yourself from the beginning is also just a really, it's just easier way to go about it when you have when that is an option for you.
No, it makes sense. It's really, a short term play versus a long term play.
Hmm.
Really, it's like investing in your brand. It's not
Right.
transactional. So yeah, that totally makes sense. And that's I guess the found goes back to the foundation on which some of the which strong brands have been built, and then you're basically extending that and
Hmm.
sort of supercharging it with the
Yeah.
influencer
And
network.
from a media play too, like, I think if I think back on like another big brand that did this to, help build up that brand equity again, was Victoria's Secret. I think like earlier, it was either early in the year or maybe end of sometime last year, they announced like, this is our new network, our new
Mhm.
like ambassadors, but people that are helping to, change the brand face of Victoria's Secret. And they had all these names. Oh my gosh, I'm already kind of blanking on the names, so I don't want to misspeak. But I know they had a woman from the women's national soccer team. They
Mhm.
had, I believe, they had Emma Watson. I want to say, but again, don't quote me on it. But again, like the whole goal was right. Like these are our new group of ambassadors that are going to help with the rebrand of Victoria's Secret,
Mhm.
and just that announcement alone got the coverage. It got the conversation on social media. They posted about it. The individual celebrities posted about it. So that alone is like a way that you're presenting like almost their version of an always on type thing,
Mhm.
um, without really having nothing to show for it just yet. At least I haven't seen anything come out of that announcement just yet. But just
Yeah.
the fact that like, hey, we're announcing that these are our ambassadors is just enough for people to make that connection. Like, oh, now I connect this brand with that person.
No, and that just shows the power
Hmm.
or influencer that creator economy or influencers can bring to a brand, especially a brand like Victoria's Secret that went through a major transformation over the last few years. So
Hmm. Exactly.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, that totally makes sense. Well, I guess that brings us to the last part of the podcast, sort of the fun part, if you will. I have three sort of rapid fire questions for you that I typically ask every guest on the podcast. Are you ready for it?
Okay, yes, hit me.
So, can you name one or two best books that have had a major influence on you, whether it is personal or professional? Uh,
All right. Yeah, I guess two come to mind. I guess I'll do one from actually when I was growing up and as a teenager. I played tennis a lot growing up, and that being a sport that is such a mental game, I just had a really hard time, as a teenager dealing with emotions if I double faulted or made an error on the court. But but those emotions are so visible because it's just you out there against another opponent. So my coach recommended the book Mind Gym, and it was just a book that, at that age when I was, 16, 17 years old, that it was the first time I had read something that I felt like, oh, like I can resonate with this, as someone who, was just playing it a lot at that time. And even if you're not someone who's, going to move on to become like a professional athlete, it's just the framework of dealing with certain things, mentally when you're faced with obstacles or something that doesn't go your way, was just a really great lesson for me to learn at that point in my life. But just a book that I kind of remember this day because it was the first time that I was like highlighting things, like annotating with like post-it notes and like referring back to it. And so that was just something that came to mind. And I guess most recently I read The Undoing Project by
mhm.
Daniel Kahneman, and I forget the other psychologist's name, but I just really like that book because it just broke down again certain frameworks and certain things that I obviously had learned maybe in like high school or in college in my psychology classes, but just reading the
Mhm.
origins of it, how they came up with all these biases and their studies and just their life story was just really cool to learn more about. Just more like the story behind why they are able to make all this happen in terms that we all use to this day.
Nice, nice. Since you mentioned tennis, I'm gonna hijack the script a little bit because
Okay.
I played tennis in school and college. And so I'm gonna skip one of the questions in the script
Okay.
and add one more question. Who's your favorite tennis player?
Oh gosh. Ooh. I mean, growing up, I would have said Sharapova because I had her racket at some point. I was like a Prince tennis
Oh
player for a
yeah,
second,
yeah, I
but
know the
then
brand.
all throughout high school, and I think to this day, I still have the Serena K Blade team racket. So I think from that aspect, I just really appreciated being able to follow the success of these players, and I mean, talking about influencers, how they've been able to influence their own brand and things outside of tennis, like Sharapova and Serena. I would say in the tour today, um, oh my gosh, like I'm sure you've followed Breakpoint a bit on
Yeah,
Netflix.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's really cool that these players are getting a little more media attention now because I personally followed Defoe, Taylor Fritz, CC
Uh-huh.
Pass, Curios on my personal
Oh
follow.
yes, absolutely,
Like, I've been
absolutely.
following them for years now, so to see people now thinking like, "Oh, Taylor Fritz, he's like the next guy." I'm like, "Wow, like, thanks for catching on because we haven't had a top 10, we haven't had an American in the top 10 for years." So, it's just really cool to see how they've evolved. So, I think it's just a group of the new age that has been imminent, right? Because
Hmm.
the big 3, or for a bit it was the big 4 with Stan Wawrinka,
Yeah,
Murray,
yeah.
Djokovic, Nadal, Federer, they all were kind of in between each other for a long time. So to see the new era of players come out, I just think it's really cool and inspiring to the players or even to more people who are maybe becoming more aware of what's happening in
Yeah.
tennis.
Yeah, no, I've just seen the way the game has evolved. Anyways, I can talk about it all day.
For a
Probably not,
different podcast.
probably not professional. So that brings to my last question. Really, what's your favorite social media platform?
Um, my favorite social media platform. Okay. For a bit, I really thought Snapchat was really cool. Like some of the platform features that they were doing. Like I think if you remember, they had the discovery tool where you could check in on what people were doing halfway across the world. Like I thought
Hmm.
that was really cool. I don't know if that is as much of a thing, but back then, for how social media was, still in that phase of like, we're here to connect you to different parts of the world. I thought that was really cool. And then Instagram, I would say, is probably still my favorite tool,
Hmm.
just because, yes, they copied some features from Snapchat and TikTok, but hey, look at the adoption. Look how they've been able to work off of it. And again, like I guess going back to like the main part of like the role of influencer marketing, like if you want to stay in the game, this is what you got to do. And I think Instagram has just been able to really be a sustaining pillar in the game of social media, social networks who adapt their tools. And granted, not everything is perfect on Instagram, nothing is perfect on any other channel,
Hmm.
but just their ability to adapt so quickly, I think, is what's kept them really high up there. And the fact that out of all the tools, the most of money from like influencer marketing is spent on Instagram, I think is like
Hmm.
telling of just because of how well you can do influencer marketing on Instagram.
Yeah, and they recently launched Threads, so I'm
Threads.
looking for.
Yes, I know. I was gonna bring up Threads too. Like all the brands are on it, but obviously they had people in there before, so they had early access to people. So the fact that they grew the number of users within hours is an incredible feat.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, like I mean, they were smart. They
Yeah,
planned for it. They
absolutely.
planned for
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I'm really looking forward to see how that turns out because the way it's really exploding. So it's going to be
Yeah,
interesting.
it really
Yeah,
is. And at this point, like I don't know if like everyday people are on there. I mean, obviously they are, but in terms of like the people who are mostly talking, I feel like it's just brands talking to themselves and the marketers who are supporting them. So
yeah,
I'm curious to see when we'll see the brand fans engaging with them, and it's not just verified accounts
yeah.
commenting on verified accounts.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, Alaciel, this has been a blast. I think it was a great conversation. I'm sure our audience will find it very, very useful and entertaining as well. So thank you so much for taking the time on your Friday afternoon to speak with us.
Yes.
We really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's been fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Thank you.